everyone. Today we're going to get started with the video for chapter 17 of our book. And here we're looking at Jennifer's perspective, and we start right where we left off in chapter 16, where Robin wanted to talk to Jennifer. And she's a little worried about what Robin will say, but she knows they need to talk. Jennifer made a realization when she saw Ronald get out of the truck when they arrived at the church. And she says, as he stood beside Robin, she knew that her rapist had not been that tall. So she's already seeing, even before she talks to him, she's already seeing that, wait a minute, this really wasn't the right guy. And she says, I simply had no idea I would be facing not only Ronald, but his wife too, but I knew it was Robin's right to be there. And Robin had asked her, why did it take so long to come forward? And this reply from Jennifer was kind of interesting. She says, when he first got out, the police advised me not to do anything. They said it was too risky, but I thought about him every day. So maybe all of that fear, would she have had that fear on her own? The way the chapters had read is that she had that fear on her own that she built up in her mind. But could that have built up because of what then we know that the police had told her? So maybe if the police hadn't said anything like that, would she have gotten all that fear, or maybe she would have talked to Ronald sooner? She also made another realization at the top of page 249. Another thing that stunned me, how gentle and soft-spoken Ronald Cotton was. Nothing like the menacing voice I could still hear hissing in my mind, the voice I had associated with his image for so long. She realizes he was free, truly free. And then they all have a moment where they hug. And then after the meeting, they go and pick up her kids, and they go out to dinner with Mike, and she thinks to herself, had I really just been in the arms of the man I had accused of raping me? So she's still processing everything. And then Ron's lawyer, Tom, asked her if she would write a letter in support of the bill that would increase the amount of money that Ron would receive. Mike had written one, and she said she would too. And so she, on page 251, this is the letter. She said a few interesting things. She said, I would now begin a new journey, this one filled with fear and regrets, the two things I wished for Mr. Cotton. It is now clear to me that we were and are victims of the same man, Bobby Leon Poole. Ron's world has been turned upside down by a brutal and violent attack against his body, his soul, and his spirit. But we can try to make his new life, his future, and his dreams easier and real. So that was very nice of her to be able to do that. She says on the top of page 252, Ronald gave me something that eluded me in the 13 years since that sweltering summer night, the gift of forgiveness. Not because I deserved it, but because that's what grace is about. It's about power and letting go. I realized Bobby Poole still had a hold on me after all these years, and that the anger that lived in me had completely changed the way I looked at the world, at what was possible. And so she asks Ron, do you forgive Bobby Poole? And his response is, I don't really feel like I have to. I heard he's dying from cancer or something. So if not for the DNA, he would have gone to his death, still not admitting anything. But I'm already past it, and it's not going to do anything for me. And so here, that's the thing about Bobby Poole. He was never going to admit that until they finally showed him, hey, we've got DNA evidence that proves you did it. And so for Ron, he had 11 years in prison where he had to really come to terms with this, or it was going to eat him alive. And so that's kind of what happened with Jennifer. She found herself being caged, boxed in again. She said, for years I had harbored anger, misdirected of course, anger that kept me caged in fear, judging Ronald even after his innocence, judging Phil Mosley as less than human. I wanted to be as open in my heart as Ronald had been, to stand before me and forgive me. I needed to forgive Bobby Poole, not for his sake, but for mine. And so she asks Mike, can I write to him, ask to meet with him. And on page 253 is a letter she writes to him. But of course we know Bobby Poole never writes her back. But she says something else surprising happened. Ronald Cotton and I began to talk. So they started doing interviews, and in between, while they were waiting for cameras to set up and everything, they started having a dialogue. And um, on one of those occasions, she says, I had to bring the kids with me, and I decided it was time they met Ron anyway. I explained to them that Ronald had spent time in prison because I had thought he'd done a bad thing, but that I had been wrong. So she's trying to show her kids that you've got to admit when you're wrong, you've got to show forgiveness, and you've got to apologize for that. And then at the end of that little day, she realizes she does trust Ron because she allowed her son to ride in his truck with him. And then Rob, the ADA who helped with the wrongful conviction, called Jennifer one day to ask if she might want to give a talk at a prosecutorial symposium he was teaching in Asheville, North Carolina. So he's trying to spread the word about these kind of wrongful convictions to other prosecutors to let them know what's going on. And she says, despite my nerves, the looks on people's faces told me that it was so important to keep doing what I was doing. And where it once humiliated me to talk about what happened to me, every time I stood up and talked about it meant that the hour in the dark I spent with Bobby Poole had less and less of a hold on me. So she's finding that the more she talks about what happened, the more she talks to people to educate them, it's becoming more of a freeing, cathartic moment for her so that it's not caging her in as much. All right, so that is the end of chapter 17. And now we're on to chapter 18 where we look at Ronald's story. So that'll be the next video to watch.